Good morning and welcome to this latest Eurostat webinar. This will be a briefing event on the newly published 2022 Sustainable Development Goals Monitoring Report. Before we begin with the event itself, I just need to do a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this event and we will make the recording available afterwards via our website and our Facebook page. So if you are unable to follow the entire session, you will find the recording there shortly after the session ends. And secondly, we're using Slido and we're putting on screen now the code and a QR code that you can follow. And using Slido, you can pose questions, and we may also use it for a little bit of interaction. We may put some additional bits and pieces on Slido. But that's where you can pose your questions for the panel at the end. Okay, we'll also use Slido after the event to do a little satisfaction survey on how you found the event. So that's the housekeeping, so let's move on. So I would be very pleased to introduce our Director General, Mariana Kotseva, who will introduce this report and this event. Mariana, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to welcome you today on this event, which is devoted to the 2022 edition of EU SDG Monitoring Report. So this is our 6th edition of this type of report, because since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development by United Nations in 2015, Eurostat has annually produced a report to follow the progress against the SDGs in the EU context. Let me say a couple of words as a background, as a welcoming tips to you are listening to the presentations of my colleagues and to your questions. So this is a report which is based on a set of 101 indicators that have been selected in broad consultation with different stakeholders, not only let's say the policy departments of European Commission or other bodies, but also non-governmental organizations, statistical offices and general public. So this list of indicators is based on 2 criteria: their policy relevance, what they show in terms of the progress, whether they measure well the trends, and second, in terms of their statistical quality, so that you have a trustworthy picture of what is going on. Some of these indicators you know well, because if you follow the set of indicators used for other EU policies, you could find some of our indicators in SDGs report used in other occasions, like for monitoring the circular economy progress, or for the European pillar of social rights. 2/3 of our EU indicators coincide with the United Nations list of global set of indicators, but 1/3 is very specific for the European Union, because of course we have to focus our report on the EU context. Let me say maybe 3 interesting features about this year's edition of the report, what is specific. First of all, we are very delighted to announce that for the first time since we have published this report, we managed to assess all goals. You know that there are 17 goals, and in the past we didn't have enough indicators to measure the progress on all 17 goals. In this year report, we completed the list of indicators so we could assess all goals, including we have 2 new goals, new in sense of assessment. One is SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, and another one is SDG 14, life below water. So this is the first distinguished feature of the report. We cover all the goals. The second distinguished feature of this report is that we have put more importance on the regions for implementing the SDGs, and the report includes maps for several indicators with regional data. In addition, you could find regional breakdowns that with an easier access on the SDG section of the Eurostat website. So regional aspect is the second important feature. And the last important feature which I would like to highlight is that we improved our analysis of the so-called spillover effects, for example, using environmental footprints developed by Eurostat in cooperation with the Commission Joint Research Center, GRC. So you see what is the effect of what we are doing outside the narrow context of SDG indicator set. Finally, before moving to the next speaker, I just wanted to once again to say that we are very happy to have you today, and we are looking forward for your questions at the event and also later on using our social media or different channels which we have for interaction with users. But I just wanted to stress that report is not the only element of this communication package on SDGs. We have also interactive digital publication where you could explore the indicators in a more joyful and playful way, and you could reuse the data. We have also a graphical interactive tool showing country by country progress, where you also could play, if I could use this word, you could look at the different countries, compare them, select different SDG goals. We also have other visuals, a number of supplementary statistics explain articles. We will publish them in the coming weeks, where a focus will be on one or another SDG goal. So with all this communication package and with the event today, we trust that we could be useful as Eurostat to provide solid, high quality information which could be used for monitoring the SDG report. And now I would like to hand over to the Commissioner Gentiloni, who is not only responsible for Eurostat, but he is also, as you know well, the Commissioner for Economy in the European Union, and one of the he was actually very active in pushing for using and integrating sustainable development goals in the European semester to find the link between the progress on economy and progress on SDGs. And after that, my colleague Tim will chair the meeting, will facilitate it and moderate it, and then you'll have the pleasure to see the report in more details and also to ask questions. Thank you very much for being with us again, and now to the message of Commissioner Gentiloni.
It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the launch event of the 2022 Eurostat SDG Monitoring Report, the most important tool we have for monitoring progress toward the Sustainable Development Goals at EU level. Over the past few years, we have lived through two extraordinary crises, two black swan moments, which have impacted our social and geopolitical fabric. Overcoming these crises demands a determination not to return to business as usual, but to transform the EU's economic model and overall resilience. In this, the UN SDGs remain our compass. In order to deliver on the SDGs, we need reliable and objective data to monitor progress. And I would like to seize this opportunity to thank Eurostat colleagues for the invaluable and constantly expanding work they are doing in this area, in partnership with national statistical institutes and other national authorities. Knowing where we stand, identifying the most pressing sustainability challenges, and critically examining our performance is essential if we are to ensure a sustainable Europe in a sustainable world. So the SDGs are an intrinsic part of this Commission's political program and are integrated into all Commission proposals. We are striving to achieve this through a whole-of-government approach, so to speak. Since the beginning of our mandate, we have launched several deeply transformative initiatives, such as the European Green Deal, the Climate Law, the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan. In addition, the EU adopted unprecedented instruments, such as the SURE instrument to preserve employment in the pandemic-induced downturn, and Next Generation EU to build back better over the medium term. We are now focused on implementing the National Recovery and Resilience Plan in EU member states, which will make an important contribution to the achievement of SDGs. Moreover, we have been progressively integrating the SDGs into the European semester over the years. The first steps in this direction were taken in the 2020 cycle of the semester. This year, we have gone further. All the key documents in our Spring European Semester package, published yesterday, highlight the implementation of the SDGs. Each country report includes a detailed annex featuring its progress towards individual SDGs. Sending another important signal, the EU SDG monitoring report was for the first time published on the same day as the European Semester Spring Package. This reflects the value of the Eurostat SDG monitoring for policy making, and I would encourage Eurostat and its partner institutions to continue improving the available data and the timeliness of statistics, which are needed to underpin our political priorities. Let me now finish by outlining our plans for next year. The Commission, in close coordination with the Council, decided to present an EU voluntary review, the equivalent to the voluntary national reviews, ahead of the 2023 UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. This plan is also strongly supported by the European Parliament. This will put the EU in a strong position at the SDG Summit in September 23 and will give us the possibility to promote a common EU voice at UN level. The Eurostat SDG report will cover the statistical side of this review and will therefore play an even more important role next year. Ladies and gentlemen, only if we act together at all levels, from local and regional to European, can we make a real difference on the ground. I wish you an interesting event, a lively discussion, and a stimulating read of the report, and I'm confident that it will inform our collective action to make the SDGs a reality for future generations.
So, thank you to Mariana for her introduction, and thank you also to the Commissioner for recording that video message for us. I'd now like to remind you about the Slido for posing questions. We're putting the QR code and the number up again, and we will have a Q&A session after the presentation. But now I would like to introduce Mirjam Bloemers, who was the editor-in-chief of our monitoring report this year and who will give an overview of the key findings of the report. So over to you, Mirjam.
Thank you very much. Dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning also from my part. It is a true honor to be presenting to you today our 2022 monitoring report on progress towards the SDGs in an EU context. This is the 6th edition of our monitoring report, as our Director General already pointed out, and its essence is best summarized with the following overview on the next slide. This arrow displays a summary assessment of how the EU is progressing towards the SDGs. It is based on the development over the past 5 years, and thus mainly referring to 2015 to 2020 and 2016 to 2021, and is based on selected indicators. Towards the right are the SDG goals for which there has been significant progress. In the middle are the goals which display moderate progress, and on the line, which divides moderate progress from moderate movement away, are those goals with mixed trends, as well as a bit towards the left, the goal which displays slight movement away from sustainable development objectives. Let's now have a deeper look into the goals, and let's do so by order of progress. And thus we can see on the next slide the best performer, which is SDG 16. The indicators measuring the fostering of peace and personal security within the EU territory and improving access to justice as well as trust in institutions have or show clearly favorable trends for the EU over the past 5 years and have put this goal thus on top again of the ranking. The share of the EU population reporting crime and violence and vandalism in their neighborhoods, for example, has fallen to 10.9% in 2020. And also 54% of the population perceived the independence of the judiciary as very good or fairly good, which is a 4% increase over the last 5 years. Next is SDG 1, no poverty. This is characterized by considerable improvements in all poverty dimensions monitored, as well as an increased share of people being able to meet their basic needs. Please note that this data does not yet fully reflect the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic due to the time lag of the statistics. On the next slide, we see that for SDG 8, after the contraction of the EU economy in 2020, there are clear signs of recovery. This is also reflected in the labour market, with the EU's employment rate reaching a new record high of 73.1% in 2021. Also, the share of young people, neither in employment nor in education and training, the so-called needs rate, also fell in 2021, but the progress over the past 5 years has not yet been strong enough to put the EU on track towards its 2030 target. Coming now to SDG 7, energy. The remarkable drop in energy consumption in 2020, a minus of 8%, has contributed to the achievement of the energy efficiency target. The EU has also reached its 2020 renewable energy target. However, the imports of fossil fuels still cover more than half of the EU's energy demand. We're now reaching the middle field on the next slide. SDG 9 has still displayed significant progress, whereas the other SDGs visualized here have shown moderate progress. For SDG 14, as already mentioned by our General Director, the monitoring report features now for the first time a goal level assessment, thanks to better data availability. And for this goal, for life below water, the trends in marine conservation and sustainable fisheries are generally favorable. For example, the area of marine protected area has more than doubled since 2012. However, the trends in ocean health are rather mixed. Coming now to the SDGs displaying the least progress on the next slide. SDG 17, the progress for SDG 17 was strongly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Concerning, for example, the financial governance within the EU, the EU's overall debt to GDP ratio fell slightly in 2021 after reaching a record high in 2020. And also the share of environmental taxes and total tax revenues, has declined further. On the other side, the EU's ratio of ODA, official development assistance, to gross national income has reached a new record high. So the overall goal assessment for SDG 17 is more or less neutral. On SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, here also the improved data availability has for the first time allowed a goal level assessment, and the available data paint a rather mixed picture for the EU for this goal, also with an overall neutral assessment. So on average, no progress over the last 5 years. Finally, SDG 15. The indicators for SDG 15 have shown some slight improvement, combined with a few clearly negative developments, which have resulted in an overall slightly negative goal assessment. To go a bit into detail, while both the EU's forest area and terrestrial protected areas have increased slightly, the pressures on biodiversity continue to intensify. These pressures are, for example, from land take, and this is also reflected in the long-term decline in common birds and grassland butterflies. This was a summary of the key findings. Please bear with me on the question now on how this is assessed. So a short outline through the methodology on the next slide. Some of the information that we can see here has already been mentioned. The monitoring is based on the EU SDG indicator set, which is structured along the 17 goals. And 2/3 of the indicators are aligned with the global goals. The differences, as our Director General mentioned, are necessary to focus on new policies and phenomena particularly relevant in the EU context. The indicator set comprises 101 indicators. Of these, 31 are multi-purpose indicators. These are indicators that are used for the monitoring of 2 different goals. And the indicators are reviewed annually. On the next slides, we can see that the EU SDG indicator set is developed by Eurostat in cooperation with the responsible services of the European Commission, as well as numerous other stakeholders in the EU. While the consultations might vary a bit from year to year, this, I believe, provides a good overview for the stakeholders that are regularly consulted. And the main purpose of the 2022 review of the indicator set also reflects that the indicators serve to monitor EU policies. In this case, specifically, the new targets of the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plans were taken into account, for example, as well as the 8th Environmental Action Programme, whose monitoring framework is currently under development. Now, onto the methodology per se. The next slide depicts schematically the methodology used. So, based on the differentiation of an indicator of whether an indicator has a quantitative policy target or it has not, there are 2 underlying questions. For indicators with a quantitative policy targets, the question is the EU on track to reach the target? And for indicators without such a numerical quantitative target, the question is the EU moving in the right direction? In general, we differentiate significant progress, moderate movement away, and significant movement away for indicators. These are also the categories that were displayed on the overview arrow. On the next slide, we can see an overview of the indicators with numerical targets. Without wanting to go much into detail here, just to summarize, out of the 101 indicators, 22 have numerical targets, so around 1/5. As I mentioned, the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan, the first target listed here, so to reduce the number of people at risk of poverty or social exclusion by 15 million by 2030, for example, is part of that action plan. So how is the indicator assessment carried out? On the following slide, we can see the overviews over the long-term trend, that is to say the past 15 years of available data, and the short-term trends, the last 5 years. For SDG 16, the best performer, and for on the left side, and for SDG 15 on the right side, the SDG displaying the least progress. And even so, we can see that SDG 15 still displays quite a few green arrows. That is to say, progress towards several of the targets or objectives. And this overview also shows that the data availability for the past 15 years sometimes is a bit spotty. That is why the short-term assessment is aggregated in what we call the speedometers of progress. On the next slide, these are the so-called speedometers of progress, again for SDG 6 and SDG 16 and SDG 15. And we can see that even though SDG 15 has shown the least progress on the speedometer, which ranks from progress and movement away, it is still quite in the middle. And this assessment of the progress of the indicators based on the past 5 years is the foundation for our overview arrow that we have seen at the beginning, and we can see also again on the next slide, as it displays the progress of each of the SDGs at the EU level. So we have come now full circle on the methodology, and thanks for bearing with me through this methodological excursion. Besides the analysis of progress of each of the SDGs at the EU level, the monitoring report also contains a statistical overview of the status and progress of the EU member states towards the 17 SDGs. Based on the EU SDG indicator set, on the next slide, we can see this overview for Belgium. On the status of each of the SDGs is displayed on the y-axis and is calculated in relation to the EU average, and the progress, the x-axis, is based on the average growth rate of all the assessed indicators in each of the SDGs over the past 5 years. So in the green quadrant up on the right upper corner, all the goals can be found for which, in this case for Belgium, is making progress and for which the status is better than the EU average. As the Commissioner already mentioned, these member states overview also feed into the European semester, which is the framework for integrated surveillance and coordination of economic and employment policies across the EU. Concretely, these member states overview are part of the country reports. Besides the member states overview, the monitoring report also contains sections focusing on specific topics. These are, for example, the impact of COVID on the SDGs, the assessment of spillover effects, and the interlinkages between the SDG indicators. And I would now briefly elaborate on the first two. On the next slide, we can see that the analysis of the impact of COVID-19 on the SDGs takes into account all 3 dimensions of sustainability, the social, economic, and environmental ones. Here illustrated, for example, by the excessive mortality rate, inflation, and quarterly greenhouse gas emissions. The increased mortality is the most obvious consequence of the pandemic. The graphs here also depict the range of the member states, indicating the underlying variance of the EU figures. And even though some positive effects on the environment, including the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, are visible, it's also possible that these short-term trends are temporary. The COVID-19 section also contains an analysis of other short-term available indicators as well as breakdowns. So please have a look. And last but not least, the assessment of the spillover effect on the next slide. Countries' actions may positively or negatively influence other countries and their capacity also to achieve the SDGs. The so-called spillovers may be a result thus of deliberate transboundary actions, but also an unintended consequence of domestic policy. And in this section, a selection of indicators on the environmental and economic spillover effects of consumption in new member states is presented. These indicators are the CO2 emissions, land use, material extraction, and gross value added. And to start here with the CO2 emissions, while in 2018, the EU has 6% of the global population and emitted directly 9% of the worldwide CO2 emissions, and its consumption triggered 10% of the CO2 emissions around the world. On the next slide, we can see the results also for the other indicators. The EU share of global consumption of materials extracted, 7%, as well as its land used, 5%, correspond to more or less to its share of the global population. In contrast, the share of global value added is with 17%, substantially larger. And looking at the trends, over the past decade, the EU's negative balance for CO2 emissions and materials has slightly decreased, while the land footprint spillover effect has increased. I hope this has raised your interest. In case you're interested into more information, please find here a selection of the tools that are part of the communication package. As the details were already mentioned, I can only invite you to please have a look. So much from my side, and I now look forward to our discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miriam, for that. We're now going to move into a Q&A session. I'm going to introduce the panel briefly, and then we'll start with the Q&As. So we have Viveka Palm, who is our Director for Sectoral and Regional Statistics, and whose responsibilities cover this area, the unit responsible for this report. We have Arturo de la Fuente Nuno, who is the Deputy Head of Unit for Environmental Statistics and Accounts, Sustainable Development. And we have Christine Meyer, who is the Team Leader for Sustainable Development Indicators. And Miriam is staying with us as well in the Q&A panel, as I said, Chief Editor of this year's publication. So I'm going to give a first sort of slight caveat. We've received a lot of interesting questions. However, several of them really relate to policy issues, and Eurostat doesn't do the policy. We do the collection of the data, the calculation of indicators, the calculation of the progress or lack of progress, and the overall report. So we may not be able to give a comprehensive answer to every question, but we will at least indicate to you where a question goes beyond our competence. So look, turning to the questions, we have 3 questions. The first 3 questions we have are all overlap into policy areas. So we had a question about whether we're planning to focus on sport. Is the EU planning to focus on sport to achieve the SDGs? And then we have 2 health questions. When will there be cardiac rehabilitation for everyone? And how will we reduce the mortality rate from cardiovascular diseases? These, Viveka will say a word, but they all spill over into policy areas. Viveka.
Thank you very much, Tim. Yes, and as you say, we are mainly concerned with the monitoring of the high-level trends of society. And so for many of the solutions and the ideas on how to come closer to sustainability, that is a lot of other actors who are using the data that we have or are making special studies. So for all these issues that were mentioned, they have an impact on healthy life years, which is one of the indicators in the health goal, the SDG number 3. But for more information on what specific actions that either countries or the EU are taking to become closer, we would need to refer to the relevant policy institutions, either the DGs or the health institutions in the countries. So thanks.
Thank you, Viveka. The next question, are there tangible changes in climate matters around 1.5 degrees after COP26? Again, has a policy element, but Arturo, I think, has an element of an answer to that. Arturo.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Well, let me say first that the report does not include information on the commitments of the member states or the monitoring of the commitments of member states towards COP26. Furthermore, this year we don't have information about, or we don't monitor temperatures. Instead, the report this year is much more focused on greenhouse gas emissions. So we have information about that. And we follow with the standard methodology used for all the indicators, short-term developments and long-term developments. The latest data used in the chapter for SDG 13 about greenhouse gas emissions is for 2020, up to 2020. This is the official data that we have. And the progress in the 15 years before 2020 and in the 5 years before 2020 is positive. So there is positive development about net emissions of greenhouse gases. Having said that, the very latest data that we have in the report about greenhouse gas emissions is in the chapter about COVID, and it's quarterly information produced by Eurostat, for which we have data up to 2021, quarter 4, so 2 extra years of data. And this shows that all the progress we have done with the lockdown, with the decreased emissions during the lockdown, we are losing this progress. So in the very short term, we are going back, but the overall trends are positive about greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Arturo. And then we have another question. the March 2022 proposal for a directive excludes men victims of rape. Where is SDG 5 on gender equality? Again, I must stress that Eurostat isn't responsible for the legislation in this area. And was it Miriam or Christine was going to give a sort of summary of gender equality?
I can gladly start, and Christine, if you want to complement. So if I may use this opportunity also to do a slight advertisement for our brochure, which summarizes on 2 pages each of the goals. And here for gender equality, we can see then on one side that for the indicators assessed, several of these refer to gender gaps, that quite a few of the gender gaps are to the disadvantage of women, but also some to the disadvantage of men. So to the disadvantage of women, there is certainly the gender pay gap, the gender employment gap, and the gender gap for inactivity due to carrying responsibilities. Whereas to the disadvantage of men, there is the gender gap for early school leavers and the gender gap for tertiary education attainment. And if we look also at the short-term trends on these indicators, we can see that while the gender gaps that are to the disadvantage of women have shown progress, those that are to the disadvantage of men have not.
Thank you, Miriam. So now we've got some more questions. So question 6, I am curious if Eurostat's experience this year provided new insights into critical data gaps on SDGs, beyond SDGs and sustainability. I think before I ask Viveka, I will just say that it's not just this year. Our experience through the COVID crisis and the Russian invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated the importance of timely statistics and in many cases in new statistics. But Viveka, have you something
I think that Miriam has some really good answers to this one, actually. So, but before we go there, just to say that we do follow this up and discuss with the countries possible ways of introducing new indicators every year, and also with policymakers. So there is an ongoing process to try and follow and to figure out where the data gaps are. But Miriam, please.
Yes, to add to that, in the context of each year's review, also what we call so-called on-hold indicators identified. So indicators where either the data availability is not yet given or the statistical quality of the indicators might not be as ripe yet as to be used for the EU SDG monitoring. And these are then included as so-called on-hold indicators. We have quite a few of them, and if I may just pick an example, for example, food waste. So there are currently modeling estimates at EU level, and as soon as member states data becomes available for this indicator, it's certainly to be considered as a new potential indicator.
Okay. Thank you, Miriam. So then I think we have another question. Will the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the resulting food security, energy and supply chain crises lead to backsliding or deprioritizing of SDG aspirations? And I think Viveka can say something about this.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that we can see that the SDGs will remain relevant over time. The goals are for 2030, and very similar questions were raised when COVID struck. Like, is this not are we not looking too far ahead now when we have a crisis? But in fact, both the food issue, energy issue, and supply chains are all covered by the UN goals and by the indicators. And the 100 indicators that are the core of this will remain showing overall development. So I think this is also possible to encompass other types of crisis. It's broad enough for that. Then, as Tim was saying, maybe it means that we will need to dig in to find more specific statistics on certain issues, and that can then feed into specific analysis. Thanks.
Thank you, Viveka. Next question. What opportunities do you see in shifting from education for environmental sustainability to education for sustainable development goals? Arturo, I think you have some response to this.
Yes, thank you. So let me first say that environmental sustainability is just one of the dimensions or aspects of the SDGs. We also have to look at the social sustainability and economic sustainability. So we are talking here about education of environmental sustainability versus a broader range of education, including social aspects and economic aspects. Economic meaning different ways of producing and consuming in a more sustainable way. So it's clear that there is broadening this base opens the possibility to more people to be aware of how they can make a difference and to take action to make a difference in our different roles as professionals, as consumers, as family members, etc. So it opens the gate to more people reacting and acting in a different way. So it can only have a positive effect, I think.
Thank you, Arturo. I think question 9 is also for you. We've asked about career choices. Which academic vocational fields currently have the greatest need for an increase of personnel and/or leadership with expertise in sustainability?
Yes, here I would like to give a message a bit similar to the previous question. I think when we look at career choices or job opportunities, where the job opportunities are, I think the angle that we must consider is really that is not a question that there is a niche of a specific career opportunities for the SDGs, is rather for every one of us. The question is how to do our jobs in a different way, whichever our job is, whether we are a manager of a company or we work in the public service or we are a truck driver. How can we make a difference and which is the new way of performing our economic activity in a more sustainable way? So if we are an architect, for instance, this is something quite in demand now because construction is economic activity that uses a lot of natural resources. So which new ways of making buildings that in a more sustainable way that generate less waste or require fewer natural resources? This is one example. Obviously, manufacture and construction are economic activities that require a lot of natural resources and where environmental sustainability can make a difference. But if we consider social sustainability, any job also in the social in the sector of services can be done in a different way, for instance, more focused on gender equality or respect of minorities.
Thank you, Arturo. Then we have a sort of a more technical question. Does Eurostat plan to include GIS, graphical information system based or geocoded data and indicators more? And if so, in which areas? I don't know, perhaps Miriam, is this for you? Or
I could start off. Yes, thank you. So maybe just to start off saying that quite a few of the indicators are already based on corresponding data. For example, SDG 1510, the share of forest area, comes from Lucas. SDG 1514, the soil sealing index, comes from Copernicus. And also if you look at the on-hold indicators, so indicators that are discussed or are marked for potential further use, you will find there are also indicators coming from Copernicus land monitoring services.
If I may complement, I would like to say that we know there is demand for this type of information, and we are in discussion with colleagues in other commission services and other data suppliers. So we are moving into that direction, and in future editions of this report, I think we can expect more data based on geolocalized data sources. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have a specific question. Why is disability never mentioned, addressed under SDG 10, equality, other than to describe the goal? I don't know who wants to take that one. Have we got a volunteer for that question?
I can volunteer to start on it at least. and to say that it is an issue that is being discussed in many statistical offices, how to try and find comparable statistics for different types of vulnerable groups that then have one reason or another to be connected to this goal. Since we are often based on surveys that sort of cover the whole population, and since there are actually quite a few vulnerable groups that are relevant for this, it's a job that is continuing to it's sort of a data gap, we could say. And so we know that there is interest, and of course for the EU we are interested to have a way of measuring that can measure for all the 27 countries in a comparable way, so that we can have a harmonized follow-up. And for many specific issues, there will more be specific studies that are not conducted in the same way. And then for us, it is a bit of a complex story to try and make it an indicator at the EU level. Thank you.
Thank you, Viveka. I'm just going to interject something. I'm told by my colleagues who are monitoring the questions that we're getting a very good supply of questions. We do have a time limit on this webinar, so anything that we don't get to during the webinar, we are willing to try and answer separately outside. So I believe my colleague will put some contact details into Slido. So if we don't get through to your question, we will tell you how to pose it, or maybe we'll even type an answer in if we can quickly. So we will try and handle all the questions either by answering them during the webinar or by telling you how to get in contact with us. Anyway, so I will carry on with the questions one by one. Is it not a big flaw that there are only targets for 1/5 of the indicators? Would the EU benefit from having a plan that sets out clear targets for all goals? And I believe Arturo is willing to take that. And also I see Viveka has something to say. I don't know who wants to start, Arturo, perhaps?
Well, perhaps I can start. I wouldn't call it a big flaw. I agree that it would be better to have more targets. Having said that, there is a certain distribution of roles here between indicator making and producing statistics and setting targets. So measuring with indicators is more our job, the job of statisticians. Setting targets is normally made by policymakers. And we have to, it's a sort of chicken and egg process to get the targets and the indicators, which one comes first. Clearly, we need a cooperation and a dialogue. I want to say that since in the last years, and I think in particular since the European Green Deal, there has been a big shift of interest to have additional targets for the European Green Deal on environmental related topics, but overlapping SDGs. So I think we are going to move into this direction in the next years. We are going to have more targets, and this is going to facilitate the job of the statisticians to measure if we are getting the right progress or not.
And Viveka, I think you had something to add there.
Well, just a very short to add on that. It's when we don't have specific targets, we measure the inclination, like where is it going towards the side where you want to see it go. Typically, we will see that some of the indicators are formulated so that it's very clear what would be the target. But for others, it's sort of the best indicator that we can find to follow some type of a progress. But it's actually for very many issues, it's not really possible to find the preferred state to be in. And there it's more like the indicator is showing us a general trend, but it's not the exact thing that we want to achieve, I think. So this is just part of indicator work that we will not be able to actually discuss and find, even not for statisticians, but in the policy fields, some targets that can be set up. Thanks.
Thank you. And now we have one for Miriam. A nice, interesting one. Has Eurostat made country profiles also for the EFTA countries? So Miriam, do we cover both the EU and EFTA?
Here I would like to differentiate the different parts of the report. So in chapter 18, which is the member states overview, we do not show this country profiles for the EFTA countries. However, if we look into the other parts of the report, where for each of the indicator, the EU development is displayed, as well as the country overview, there certainly, if data is available, all EFTA countries data is shown as well.
Thank you, Miriam. And I think the next one's also for you. How was COVID-19 accounted for in the indicators? Has it been treated as an outlier or in a different way?
So the COVID-19 has not been treated as an outlier. If we look at the past 15 years, there have been several indicators displaying bigger jumps. We do not treat this in the assessment as an outlier. But please also note that due to the time lag, and not for all the SDGs, for example, in SDG 1, the full effect of the pandemic is yet to be seen.
Okay, thank you. And then there's another interesting question. Are the country performances in line with planetary boundaries downscaled to the country level? I'm not sure who can say something on that one. Arturo, I think he.
Yes. Well, I'm afraid no. The report does not include it. And the reason is because it's very complicated to define what is the planetary boundaries and to measure. In many cases, it's complicated at planetary level. So what can the planet cope with? How much can the planet cope with? And one example that is perhaps very developed and better known is the one on the increase on temperatures related to greenhouse gases. More or less every citizen knows about the 2 degrees, etc. But when you go to the bottom, the scientific evidence for it, you see that it's very complicated to establish these planetary boundaries. And the same applies to other indicators. But even more than that, at the planetary level is sort of to downsize it or to allocate quotas per countries. That is extremely difficult, and I am afraid we have not reached yet the level of statistical methodology that we can use in a sound way in our reports. I know that some Commission services are working on it, are developing methodologies, but we are not ready yet to include them in our report with the quality standards that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Arturo. And then we have one specifically, what SDG indicators are relevant specifically for youth issues? I think Miriam or Christine, I think, can answer this. I mean, obviously, many of them are relevant for youth, but
Do you want to go ahead, Christine?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, we have, whenever we have a breakdown according to age, you can all find these on our website. So in addition to what you see in the report, all the additional breakdowns, also sometimes for disability or gender, regions and so on, are available on our website. But obviously there is SDG 4, education, which has a specific youth angle. But I mean, in general, I think that the concept of sustainability is this forward-looking aspect. So we want to keep the sustainable development for the next generation so that they still have the same opportunities as we have. So I think that's also because we were discussing because of the year of youth, which is this year in 22, whether to have any specific chapter on youth, but I think it's just the report as such in a way is a chapter on youth. And then maybe we can also use this opportunity to promote another Eurostat tool, because on our website you find one specifically on youth, so you can compare yourself to the young generation in your country. That's available on our website, and that's also very nice to see where you are placed compared to other people in your country. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm aware we still have questions coming in, but we are reaching the end and we still have one more little bit to do. So I think I will say that we will post in the Slido channel how to contact us so that we can try and answer the remaining questions. Okay, so I'm going to mention, before I hand over to Viveka, who will make a closing statement about this, I'm going to mention one more thing, that we will put up in Slido a short sort of survey on what you felt about this this presentation, and we are very much encourage you to answer that, and it's only a short sharp survey, so it shouldn't take too much time. But in any case, I will now go over to Viveka for a few closing remarks on this webinar. Viveka?
Thank you very much, Tim. So thank you to all the speakers and all the questions that have been coming in. Thank you for those that have posted them. I think this has been very nice to take part in, and I hope that you feel so too, and that for the questions remaining, that there will still be some possibilities of receiving written answers. So let me just finish by giving some words on potential new developments of the SDG monitoring in the years ahead. So as the Commissioner Gentiloni already mentioned in the beginning, the EU is planning to present a voluntary EU review to the high-level political forum in the UN at 2023. And the Eurostat report is then, of course, covering the statistical part of that work. 2023 is also the halftime to the Agenda 2030 since its adoption in 2015. And so we are exploring the possibility to make a midterm assessment of the progress in the EU. Apart from that, as we have also said before, we are continuing to develop indicators and to work them into the follow-up. For example, we are working on indicators on fossil fuel subsidies. We're also working on indicators for food waste. And there are a collection on data of violence against women that we will be able to show in the assessment on 2023. So in line with the ambition of the Agenda 2030 to leave no one behind, we're also exploring some new indicators on the impact of the green transition on employment. We are looking for better data on vulnerable groups, for example, children, as well as timelier and better indicators in the environmental area, in particular on biodiversity, that has been a tricky issue for a long time in indicator work. So if you have other comments that you feel particularly useful in the report or what is missing, we are interested to know. And we always appreciate feedback in order to improve the monitoring package. So this was a short introduction to the key findings, and I hope that you will find the time to also read in the report, explore the tools available on the Eurostat website, and know that the information also goes out to the countries for them to comment and to discuss. So it's also part of the spring package and of the European semester, as it's called. The countries are also commenting on the way they are developing. So thank you very much for your participation. I wish you a nice day, and we are looking forward to welcoming you to further other Eurostat events.
For me to say, please don't log off of Slido until you've answered the short survey, because we're very interested in the results. We've posted information on how you can pose the questions we didn't get round to, how you can pose those questions to us, and we will answer those. And then just to say thank you to Viveka, Arturo, Christine and Miriam for the presentations and for forming our Q&A panel. A big thank you to Mariana Kotseva, our Director General, and to Commissioner Gentiloni for their contributions to this webinar. I have to say, I can't remember what the next webinar will be, but there will be more webinars coming in the future. Keep your eyes open on our webpage and on our social media channels, because we will indicate when they're coming, and give you a chance to take part and to participate. And of course, if you didn't manage to catch all of today's event, or if you think it's was sufficiently interesting to signal to your colleagues, friends and family, we will be putting the presentation, the recording of the presentation up on our website on the event page, and I think we'll also link to it through our social media. So thank you all very much. Please complete the survey, and I look forward to seeing you all again at our next webinar. Thank you.